The title of my presentation is related with the conflicts and transformation of the conflicts in the way they could be transformed, not through diplomacy only in a classical way of describing that, but then through people-to-people relationships. And obviously, in different contexts, different countries, that all could be very different. So I'll give the example that I know the best, and that's the Georgian example, with the type of the problem and crisis that we're experiencing now by more than 2 decades already. So to give you a bit of a context, Georgia is a small country, so I don't have an ambition of having an expectation that you know perfectly what is happening in my country or what has been happening for the past time. It's a small country, 4.5 million people, and hearing all the discussions that we've had in the previous days, it's worth to mention, I guess, with pride that we have in it, that it's a multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, and then multi-religious country throughout the history, and very inclusive in the way how the social fabric is construed in Georgia, so that we're very proud of having that multilateralism, so to say, in our cultural identity. It's predominantly Christian country, Orthodox Christian, but then as I've said, all of the diversities when it comes to different religions, different ethnicities, and languages has always been part of our culture. And then Muslim religion is not a small component into that when it comes to the diversity of our population. So the conflicts and then the area that I will be speaking about right now, we've had a prolonged problem with 2 regions in Georgia. That's the region of Abkhazia, South Ossetia. I will not take time today of describing the whole etymology of the conflict, or with the way what could be the arguments, how it all started, why it started, and then why it is protracted for long, but then more direct my attention at where we are right now, and then what are the strategies that the country has applied to that, because that's very much connected with cultural diplomacy related theme of discussion that we're all having for the past days here. But to give a bit of a context when we speak about the history into that, both regions were the same way as the rest of Georgia is multi-ethnic and multi-religious. And there were no exceptions to that when we speak about the rest of Georgia. And then communities were very closely knit, and that's an important factor to keep in mind when we compare the reality of today with the reality of what we've been experiencing prior to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, historically, what has been the case in those regions throughout, thousands of years, basically, in Georgia from that perspective. And when we speak about these regions here, again, it's Christianity, it's the Jewish community, it's the Muslim community, all the different religions, even Estonian community living in the Abkhaz region for quite some time there. I myself was raised in Abkhaz region, my mother comes from that region, and I still very well remember all my friends from there, from Abkhaz ethnicity as well. And just to give you an example, my house in one of the cities in that region is still being taken care of by my Abkhaz neighbors. We've been through wars, we've been through all of the difficulties that we've been through, but then on a personal level, those connections, at least with my generation, which perhaps is the last generation in that respects, which remembers each other and coexistence with each other and good memories of that, it's still there, and that's the potential we try to tap in right now in terms of exploring possibilities, how to revive that, how to see that as a potential for the future. And an elaborative thinking in that dimension started from 2008. Previously, we've had peace processes that were more camouflage, to be frank, of the real, rather than peace processes in the real essence of that. They were more freezing the conflict rather than actually directed at the real solution of the conflicts. And not much was happening at that time in terms of the real thinking in Georgia, that be, or in international community, obviously not in Russia as well, of how people-to-people relationship could have been an area where transformation of the conflict could have been sought as a possibility. In 2008, we've had a very tragic event, invasion of Russia into Georgia, and then as a result of that, we now have 20% of Georgia occupied by the Russian troops. It's 10,000 Russian soldiers that still stay in my country and fully control those 2 regions. They have recognized them as the independent nations, so that they would have had some sort of a legal argument in their perception why they stay in those regions. Rest of the international community is not in the position to agree with Russia on that. Territorial integrity of Georgia and sovereignty of Georgia is being widely, overwhelmingly supported. So I've been the foreign minister when the war started, so I've been engaged, obviously, in all of the details of negotiations in the aftermath of the war, in the times preceding to the war, and then in shaping up the ceasefire agreements in the way they have had to be sort of implemented. But then we faced already understanding and realization of the fact that obligations that were taken under the ceasefire agreement are not about to be implemented, so Russia was not moving out its troops, and then we would face occupation that unfortunately would have been a long-lasting one. And I hope that I'm wrong in my perception, but then it doesn't seem to be a short game, basically speaking, when we speak about the occupation. So we started as a government to think, and as a society, how we would deal with that problem, with that clear understanding and analysis that we should have been facing the problem in 21st century when big neighbor occupies part of your country, which is 20% of your country, and then you have to deal with that diplomatically, but inside of the country as well. And then we started to think how we would make the process of thinking about that inclusive, so that we would have had multi-actor approach inside of Georgia into that process, and then of our friends from outside of Georgia as well. So we started the process of elaboration of a special strategy of cooperation through inclusiveness. And the main idea was creating a framework of understanding, policy, and an action plan subsequent to that, through which we would have had an understanding how stage by stage we would try to revive connectivity of people who now find themselves on different sides of the occupation lines, basically. People that used to live together, coexist well with each other. And when we speak about the cultural diplomacy, that's an interesting factor. I think there is cultural diplomacy that could be directed at the culture of coexistence even, not just the culture in a classical perception of that. So culture of coexistence, exactly, something that we thought should have been revived, so that we would start to trust once again each other, communicate with each other, develop professional connectivities, cultural sort of diplomacy in a classical sense of that as well, and having an understanding that we belong to each other, and it's not a destiny that we have to be at war with each other when we speak about the ethnicities of Abkhaz ethnicity, Georgian ethnicity, Ossetian ethnicity, or the Georgian ethnicity in those two regions, and that the future that comes with peaceful coexistence can be much more beneficial, wealthy, and then rich in it, rather than the separation and then the type of lack of connectivity that we were experiencing throughout the years. And the situation in which we had to come up with not the recipes, but then attempts for the solutions for those big problems is a very difficult context, because the separation line, occupation line, is not controlled by either side, either Georgian side that be, or the Abkhaz side, or Ossetian side, but then Russian FSB forces. So how you do it in such a way that you ensure freedom of movement of those who are living on different sides, so that they actually can interact with each other. And we've been lucky to have a situation that at least with one of the regions, Abkhaz region, we've managed to break the ice in such a way that we've established the frameworks of relationships through the implementation process of the strategy, when we have now a situation when dynamics of relationships in different areas are very positively growing. So far, at least, that's the case. How we did that? I mean, one of the practical ways of doing that was to incentivize, so to say, that interaction. Medical field became one of the prominent fields in that dimension. We're not the best in the world when we speak about the healthcare system, but it's much better, to be at least mild on that, when we speak about the healthcare systems that the residents of those regions experience right now. So we've made our system easily accessible to them. So that would show to our compatriots there that whatever development we have that we're proud of right now, it's accessible to them. So we not only say in words that we see that we want to have them benefiting with our development, but then they actually can start to do that before conflict is being resolved. So we had a dramatic rise of those who would come and seek for the medical treatment in the rest of Georgia. And with that, it destroyed the perception that they have to fear to come to the rest of Georgia, that Georgians have hard feelings with them, because we had an excellent synergy of public and private actors there. It's not that the government made the system accessible to them, or we would made it even financially accessible to them with a special fund that we created for that. But when you go to an actual hospital, if you're not treated well, if you not have a treatment that you feel that you're respected on an equal basis than anybody else coming to the hospital, that would not have been a sort of positive story. And that synergy where all Abkhaz or Ossetians coming to the rest of Georgia felt that it was not even a hard feeling that they had to be exposed with the Georgians in the rest of Georgia, but then even a bit of a nostalgia with them of this previous coexistence, of relationships. That was an icebreaker in many ways. And we had to experience then in the blogospheres, in the virtual sort of communication fields, how much they started to talk about that, how much they started to believe that we mean to, in action rather than in words, always to extend our help to them. And we've started to stand a lot of assistance in those regions as well. So basically right now we have a situation then in the fields like HIV and AIDS treatment, tuberculosis, the diabetes, vaccination. Most of the treatments that are going to those regions, especially in the region of Abkhazia, are coming from the Georgian side. And then that's an extension of the outreach that we're trying to have to the people of those residents, that we mean when we speak that we want, again, for them to start the benefits of the development of the country of Georgia. Cultural dimension of relationship became quite interesting one, because we've had very interesting initiatives coming from filmmakers, photographers, from artists of doing the projects together. And then we've had great help from international community of supporting that as well. So we've had a number of productions that were cooperatively done, filmmakers doing films together, having campuses in Georgia, in Ukraine, in Turkey as well, where we would do co-product some of the stuff together. They would do exhibitions together. They would do photo productions together, materials through which the artists would see the reality, the future, the past, and with that trying to communicate once again with each other. But artists obviously are not the only profession that, or the means of communication that were targeted by our side, because my belief and then belief of my colleagues was very firm that interaction for the sake of interaction is not good enough. You have to have an interaction where you have common interests merging with each other so that they're sustainable after that. So instead of having conferences or the roundtables where just civil society representatives in general would meet from different sides and they would talk about the solution of the conflict, which ultimately would